Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. By doing what I do best, interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. Please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. Right then, let's get started. My guest today is Winnie Sseruma. Born in Sheffield, she was raised in Uganda. In 1988, she was a 27-year-old graduate with a sociology degree and a future ahead of her. 2 weeks later, she was offered AZT, the first HIV drug. By the early 1990s, she'd gone back to Uganda, not to live, but to die. But she didn't die. 30 years later, Winnie works across 20 countries in Africa, monitoring health programs for the Stephen Lewis Foundation. She co-founded breakfast clubs for vulnerable children in Uganda, and she's been a magazine cover star, a policy leader, and an international consultant. But this conversation isn't about her CV. It's about the journey from silence to survival, from isolation to activism, and why she believes HIV is still very much an unfinished agenda. Winnie, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Thank you, Dan.
So let's start at the beginning. What is a young Winnie like?
That takes me back a long time. I went to university on a scholarship and left Uganda at 19 years old and went to the US to study at university in Kansas.
And what year was this?
This was 1981.
Okay, so 1981, what on earth took Winnie to Kansas, to the Bible Belt?
Well, I got a scholarship to go to this university in Kansas, and that is basically it. You know, we didn't have a choice. I mean, this was a huge opportunity for me, for my family to go and study and be something.
Fantastic. And what kind of city did you find there? What was 1981 Kansas like?
Oh, my God. I don't think we have enough time for that. It was interesting. You know, it was proper cultural shock when I went to university there. The kinds of questions that I was being asked were just ridiculous. And for me, that is not what I expected in America. I went to America thinking people know everything. America is, the land of opportunity. People are smart. They do these amazing things. And what I found and experienced was not exactly that.
So what kind of questions were you being asked?
Oh, they were asking me how I knew English, why I spoke English, and how did I get to learn that? And, they thought that we lived in trees, literally in trees. And I'm thinking, what is going on? Did I arrive in the wrong country?
What? Hang on. So they thought that in Uganda you lived in a tree?
Yes, in 1981. I got asked that question.
That's crazy. I can't believe that.
I experienced it. I can tell you that. There were, I think, were about 1,000, maybe 1,000 students or so. And there were about 6 of us in the whole university, 6 Black people. after university, which was about 1985, I was unable to go back to Uganda because there was a war brewing there. I was desperate. I wanted to go back home. I was worried about my family. I was worried about if I could find anybody there. When I went back, my family was okay, but life had changed. Life was dramatically different. There were less resources. There was a lot of worry. The country was in trouble. You know, just like a country after a war, there was talk about, this condition that had been killing people. In like whole villages had been wiped out, but nobody knew what it was at that particular point. In 1988, I managed to leave the country again and go back to the States. I was offered I applied for this internship, and it was through the referral and through the application of doing of wanting to do this internship that different tests were done, and one of those tests was an HIV test, and it came back positive.
I'm assuming that there was no expectations on your part that you would return a positive result.
Yeah, it was shock. It was, I felt like my life was flashing right in my face. I thought, oh my God, how can my life end like this? Because I didn't see a way out. I didn't see any way forward. I had heard about HIV, in the US. I had heard about HIV in Uganda very fleetingly because it wasn't a subject that I felt was relevant to me at the time.
And this is in 1988, isn't it? So this is long before combination therapy. This is at a time when receiving a diagnosis is a bad prognosis. It's not good.
A death sentence, basically. That's what it was.
A death sentence for a young woman.
Of 27.
And of course, one doesn't receive diagnosis in a vacuum. We live in a real world. We have partners, families, friends. Did you tell anyone, or did you carry this pressure alone?
Well, I was obligated at that time to tell my, the partner that, and the person that I was dating at that time. That was part of the diagnosis. They ask you to, either they ask you to tell them or to tell the clinic to contact them. So I thought, let me tell them, because there are only so many times when you can tell somebody if you don't want to sleep with them, or today I have a headache, today I'm not feeling well. And I knew I didn't want to go through that. So I called the person that I was dating at the time, a heterosexual man, and they did not react well to it at all. They blamed me for putting them at risk. They cursed me out. And as they say nowadays, they ghosted me.
And how did that make you feel on this position and time when you're incredibly vulnerable?
That's not what you want to hear from somebody you feel should have your back. And it was devastation upon devastation. Fortunately, eventually they called me back and told me they had had a test and they were not positive. And for me, that was a relief. At least I wouldn't have that on my head that I had, infected somebody, even though it would have been unintentional. But it told me something, that experience, that telling was not a good thing. So I didn't tell anyone after that. It wouldn't be useful telling my parents because they were far away and they would worry. And I didn't tell my friends, especially as I sat in on conversations where people were discussing how they would treat an HIV-positive person if they knew that, that person was sitting next to them while I was part of these conversations.
And what sort of things were they saying?
They would say that they would never eat in their house. They would never go to the same bathroom. They would not live with them and they would not be friends with them. And so all of that information was just telling me, you are pariah, you are not wanted, you are the worst of the worst.
And then added to that, you're offered a drug which at first seems like a good thing.
Well, for me, I looked at this drug as, prolonging my life for just a few more years. However long that was, even if it's 1 or 2 years.
And was this part of the Concord trial here in the UK?
No. Actually, because I received my diagnosis in the US, it was a trial. I'm not sure if I knew exactly what kind of trial or the name of the trial, but I had to pay for this medication.
Well, that's I always forget about that. Was it expensive?
It was extremely expensive. It was extremely expensive and I couldn't keep up.
Wow.
I really couldn't keep up.
Can you help us understand what it is like paying for a medicine that you think is going to save your life and knowing that you do not have the financial capacity to continue paying for that medicine that you think will save your life?
Well, it is unbelievably stressful. It's no way to live, definitely. It's no way to live. If and I think some people do know that in America, you have to have health insurance. And that health insurance is usually attached to whatever job it is that you're doing. And it's mainly, white-collar jobs. If you're working at McDonald's, Taco Bell, or whatever, those kinds of jobs don't give insurance per se. So you either have insurance or you don't have insurance, and I didn't have insurance. Then you have to pay for your medication. And it is incredibly difficult. And many people, get in trouble because they can't pay health insurance, especially if you're a migrant, if you're, if you're a student, if you're anything, if you are not, able to sustain yourself financially, health, not having health insurance is incredibly expensive.
And on top of that, you have terrible side effects on this.
I was experiencing nausea in the beginning, couldn't keep food down. So that meant, even when taking the medication, I would throw up. So it means it wasn't even effective. My whole skin color changed from just being, let's say, a shiny black to a, ashy black.
And AZT was the only option, wasn't it, in the late 80s and early 90s? This monotherapy, high doses, brutal side effects. There wasn't another option.
There wasn't another option. That was it. That was it. And I mean, after years of this cycle, let's say 1988 to 1994, this cycle of being on treatment, being completely stressed out, not being able to keep up with the payments for the treatment. In the meantime, between that time, what was going on in Uganda, my country, hadn't told my parents or any members of my family. One of my brothers was definitely HIV positive. He died in 1991, and I wasn't able to leave the US. My mom died in 1990. They couldn't leave. My dad died in 1993. And the stress of it, of everything, just got to me. 1994, I left the States to go back to Uganda to die. I took 6 months worth of medication with me. And I, as soon as my medication ran out in Uganda, after 6 months, I got TB, I got pneumonia, I got diarrhea, and I nearly died.
And at that moment, Winnie, what is it like to feel that your end is approaching? Because each one of these illnesses, you would never know if this is the one that will take you. I can't imagine the stress that must have caused you.
It's a very strange feeling. When I flew out of Uganda to come to the UK, it was for 2 weeks, and I was going to go back to die, because that was my plan.
And so what happened?
I arrived in the UK and went to Newham General Hospital to have a checkup, because I hadn't had one in ages. And of course, there I was told that my body was in such bad shape, and I had a CD4 count of 1. So I definitely had AIDS.
A CD4 count of 1?
1.
Wow.
And hearing that, hearing how close I was to death, hearing I had this AIDS diagnosis, and I think, everything just came rushing back, and I broke down. and cried like I'd never cried before.
Was that a moment of relief almost, that it could just all suddenly come out? Everything, all the secrecy you'd have to do, all the hiding, all the everything, and even if it was a breakdown of despair, at least the emotions were coming out. Or was it just a horrible experience?
It was a relief. It was more relief than anything else, because I felt like I could finally let it all out. And even if, death was near, I still felt that relief, that I was finally confronting it. I was finally dealing with it. But it wasn't until this woman that I had met, this Ugandan woman that I had met very fleetingly in the building where my brother was living at the time, who asked me to go to to this place that she was going to, that where she used to socialize, and that people came to socialize. She didn't actually tell me it was a place where HIV positive people went. She just said, oh, it's just a place to socialize. And since I was on a holiday, didn't have, anything else to do. And I went, and it was a support group for people living with HIV. This space worked for me because I could see myself in all the women that I heard telling their stories. So it meant that I wasn't alone. I didn't feel alone. I felt like, is somebody else is experiencing the same thing? How? When? So it made me connect. I connected to these people. What I did next was volunteer to go to this group where people would learn about HIV treatment.
And why did you decide to do that?
Well, a friend just told me that this is where they go to learn about treatment. And I thought, well, I'm happy to go with you. Let me see what happens there. When I went there and saw the people who were there, many men, women from all different walks of life, and I was learning something so interesting that I'd never learned before, how the treatment works in the body and effectively makes you better. It was so interesting. And to learn it in a way that was engaging and accessible to me was amazing.
So then how was learning to live different than preparing to die?
What a fantastic question. I really felt like that engaging and being proactive about my life with so much more information than I had ever had before was just so invigorating. Preparing to die, yes, it was out there in my mind, but I didn't know exactly when or how that was going to happen. And so, being able to learn about treatment was so invigorating.
And do you think those early years of treatment when you were incredibly ill and everything leading up to that point where you found your people and you found your knowledge, do you feel that those years before then did leave scars on you?
I love those scars. One of the things that I didn't think that I would ever do was to learn to love my life as an HIV positive person. Because HIV is such a stigmatizing disease, and you think, how can somebody be okay with that, with such a condition, that is going to kill you, that, that is eating away at you. But with treatment, with being able to share this information with others who also engage with it and are able to, to use it in a positive way, is amazing.
So then, Winnie, can you tell me about FENA?
So FENA was a group of African women living and, affected, but mostly living with HIV, that some colleagues of mine and I put together to really support African HIV positive people to grapple with policy issues. One of the things that I learned through my early work with HIV was that, yes, we can do the community work on the ground, support people and all of that. But what is important with that, in combination with that, is to be able to formulate policy and make sure that things are, are turned into policies so that those policies can be on the books and those policies can be practiced, and that people understood what that process was.
And what kind of structural challenges were there? What kind of things were you fighting?
Oh my God. There were a lot of different things. First of all, I was in this new country where I was trying to establish myself. But I was also putting myself up, for positions within the African communities to be able to lead these small organizations, small community organizations that were unable to get funding in a country where there was so much animosity, not just in terms of, towards migration, not just in terms towards, other issues like race, but, with Black communities being the second most affected communities with HIV, there was so much, oh my God, there was so much negativity, especially in the press. The newspapers were brutal, when it came to migrants with HIV. It was scary.
What kind of things were you reading?
Oh my God. It was about this refugee comes to the UK and brings HIV. It was mostly about bringing HIV in the country, and they should be all sent back. Stuff that is not very different from some of the things that are going on right now, but without HIV. But it's always like migrants this, migrants are taking over, migrants are taking our money, migrants are taking our houses. Is that familiar?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The wheel turns around, doesn't it?
Exactly. But that then had this intersection with HIV, which was even worse. So many people didn't want to come out, didn't want to speak up. At some point, I put myself up as, chair of this National African HIV Policy Network, and became the chair, and found myself in Parliament speaking on behalf of the communities and what we were experiencing and what we needed. It was tough work.
And to the side of that, did you feel that within the HIV sphere, Black African women were maybe not being as serviced as they should have been?
There's also that intersection of gender. And yes, we weren't being served, and part of our support network were the support groups. The support groups were effective, especially for African women, because most of these support groups also supported children, and many African women have children who needed support, and some of those children were HIV positive. And I think, there wasn't a system in this country that was able to do that, to be able to be effective in that way to support families. Because we have families that were all literally HIV positive, the father, the mother, and some children being HIV positive. And there wasn't sort of a social support system in the country that was able to do that. So we had to work together to set that up.
And I think this is why the Ubuntu philosophy is so wonderful, which is something that Angela Namiba was talking about, this sense of community, because often more formal systems do not support us correctly. And I think sometimes the more informal community spaces can do a far better job.
Yes. And that's why it is important to support communities where they are, to ask them what they need rather than impose systems or whatever it is on them. And that wasn't being, facilitated. Even when, we were working with the Department of Health at that particular time, their go-to sort of statement was, we can't support all the different communities from all the different countries. We have to support you as an African community. And the kind of funding we were able to get was peanuts. Can you imagine if, for instance, somebody tells you that, we can't support you, Dan, as a British community, we can support you as a European community, because that's what they were asking us to do.
That's ridiculous. That is. That's so treating Africa like it's a country.
Yep. And that was it in a nutshell.
With no recognition given for different requirements and needs for the countries within Africa, just one big sledgehammer solution for an entire continent.
Yep.
Wow.
And of course that didn't work. It didn't work because even within these, within the different African communities, some communities were affected more than others. Others just were in denial. Others, it was so incredible. It was such incredibly difficult work to do.
So before we enter the final part of this episode, can you tell us about the international work you've been doing? Because you branched out from stunning domestic work to global now. We were talking just now about the ridiculousness of Africa being treated like a single country and the individual needs of the countries within Africa just being ignored. But you then, of course, being you, have stepped in with organizations and are really trying to bring about change.
Well, you know what? It was the landing into international development work was completely accidental. But it is one of the most amazing things that I feel I've been doing and had wanted to do for a very long time. So I work for a funding organization that really funds mostly, just really African organization, community-led, small organizations, mostly who are working on HIV in about 20 different African countries.
Because I imagine providing good HIV support isn't simply a matter of making sure tablets get through. In fact, this must apply to any medication, any treatment that is required. You can't take medicine unless you have clean water. We can't, there's no point in having a medicine if you can't distribute it. There must be so many support systems that are required in order to allow there to be effective healthcare.
They are. Dan, you are very right. They are. And this applies not only to these community-led organizations, but also to anybody providing any kind of HIV service anywhere. However, there's something specific about these small community organizations that initially were not able to access funding at all. Because the big international NGOs, had all the funding and they would do all the work. And that didn't really get down to the grassroots. These small, mostly women-led organizations have so much impact in their communities. We know that when women mobilize, they bring along everybody with them. And that is so important to grasp. But yet, these small organizations never get the funding, even now.
But women are not being listened to. So I've been speaking to contacts on the ground in Uganda and Kenya, and they're telling me, some of them, that with the cutting of the PEPFAR funding, and funding now going kind of directly to government rather than via, say, USAID or PEPFAR into them, that these central government organizations have no interest in having conversations with the community about what is needed or about the most effective ways of doing things, that they've been completely frozen out of these conversations, which kind of takes us full circle back to this idea of it's not quite as bad maybe as Africa being treated as one thing, but if the government of a country is just treating that whole country like one amorphous mass, instead of going to those communities that are the front ends, that are the coalface, then they're not going to be efficient with their spending.
And that is a big mistake. And we've been here before. When the HIV epidemic started, we've been doing all this work to make sure that, we didn't have to come back to this place again, where community members have been trained, where organizations are best, the community-led organizations are best placed to know how to distribute the resources to their communities. And that's why it makes me so proud to work with the organization that I do, because the support they provide goes directly to the community-led organization, and it doesn't pass through any other government or any other organization.
So then, Winnie, can you tell me about the book that you co-wrote?
I co-wrote this book with 4 friends of mine. We have this amazing support network of 5. And we felt like we needed to really change perspectives about the way that we are seen as Africans living with HIV, and how the work of the communities has contributed to the HIV response. There was nothing about how are Africans mobilizing, especially as communities. We are the second most affected communities in the UK with HIV. And, during the pandemic, we thought, my God, it was the 40th anniversary of when HIV was first identified in the UK in 2021, I think it was. And we thought, what a fantastic opportunity to be able to to say something different about the communities, to say something that is empowering, because we felt that as communities we were seen as victims, as people who needed to be helped, and yet there's a lot of work that we are doing. We are empowered people. We are making change. So our book that we wrote is called Our Stories Told by Us, celebrating the African contribution to the UK HIV response. And it gives a different perspective on what African communities are doing on the ground and the changes they are making, not just within the communities, but changes within this country.
Now then, Winnie, every episode I like us to take a pause for remembrance, to in our minds maybe go to the gardens at the London Lighthouse. And this is where I ask you, is there somebody that you would like to share with us to allow us to take a moment of remembrance with you?
Yes, actually. I would like to share remembrance of my brother. My brother died due to HIV-related TB in 1991, I think. He was 27. That's the same age I was diagnosed at with HIV. He was a middle child. He was a gentle giant. He was loved. And I think that is because of when he died, there was so much stigma. And I wasn't there with him, but, I sent messages back and forth. But I was also told that he experienced a lot of HIV-related stigma. I think what I would want to say to him is that he was loved. He was loved, especially by his sister and his whole family.
Now then, Winnie, you've lived with HIV now for 38 years. You've survived isolation, AZT, near death, resurrection. You've built organizations, you've supported thousands of people, you've fought for access. And with all that wealth of knowledge that you have, if you could send one message on a postcard to the world, what would it read?
One message, that's very limiting, Dan, but I'm going to try.
I'm harsh like that.
Well, I'm going to quote Maya Angelou, a poet that I really liked and a writer, and put my own interpretation on it. I'd say, in Maya's words, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. My interpretation of that is we all need to get involved in what is happening with our lives, with the world, within our communities. Just do something.
Winnie Sseruma, thank you so much for coming and joining me on HIV the morning after and sharing your fantastic story and your inspiring work that you do. It's been glorious having you on.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Really enjoyed this, and keep up the work. You are an amazing person.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.